Assalamualaikum, students at Jakarta Islamic School. My name is Mr. Aren, and I will be here to help you with your English today. In today's lesson, I want to talk to you guys about 20 different ways that we can give advice in English. Now, this is mainly for like an intermediate level of English, and some of these you may know, some of these you may not know, but I'm going to give you a rundown on 20 different ways that we can give advice. Now, to start this lesson, I want to talk to you guys about modals. Now, modals you should already know, but I want to give you like a basic rundown of what modals are and how we use modals to give advice to others. Now, the first thing that I want you to do is just imagine like one of your friends, maybe from high school or maybe even from college, and they're struggling with one of their subjects and they come to you for advice. What do you say to them? You might say to them things like you could ask the professor for help, you could ask the teacher for help, you should join a study group, you shouldn't miss any of your classes, or you must ask for help. Each of these pieces of advice, they use something called modals. So the examples of the modals used in the sentences that I used just then, the advice that I just gave then, would be could, should, must, shouldn't. Now these verbs are actually called helping verbs. This means that they come before the main verb in the sentence in English. So for example, you'll have the modal verb and then the verb. So let's look at maybe one of the sentences that I used previously. You should join a study group. Now you, and then you have the modal, should, and then you have the verb, join a study group. So you have the modal, should, and then join. Now, when you use a modal verb, you should remember that you should only use the base verb after. So you shouldn't say you must joining or you must joined. It would be you must join. Just the base verb. Now, in some of your textbooks or maybe some of the places you look online, they will order the modals, especially modals of advice, in terms of strongest and weakest. So you would see something like this. So you would see that could is the weakest form of advice. Could is the weakest form. And next you would have should. So you'll have could at the bottom, should, then ought to, had better, and then must. Must is at the strongest. So you must do this. Saying that you need to do it. You must do it. It's 100%. So basically you would look at could as just like a suggestion, and maybe must as like an order. So let's go back to could. Let's go back to the weakest form. This is more, you use this when you're not putting pressure on anybody. You would say like, you could go to see the professor, or you could study more. This is not applying pressure on anybody. Now should, let's move up one step. Should would be slightly stronger, not much. You should see the professor, you should study more, you should sleep earlier, for example. When we move up to ought to, now ought to isn't really used in the English language that much anymore. It is declining. People don't really use it when giving advice. But I'm not saying that you can't use it, but it's just not as common as maybe saying that you should do something. It's basically the same. Now, let's talk about must and had better. Like I said, must is at the very top. Must is the strongest. But had better gives off like a kind of different way of giving advice. It can actually sound kind of threatening. It could make it sound like there's a negative consequence. So for example, you had better study or you're going to fail. It normally has like a negative consequence. So that will cover the first part of giving advice. There are actually 4 categories that I want to talk to you about. Now, the first category would be the modals, which is what we have just covered. Then I would want to talk to you about conditionals, and then formal, and then casual. So 4 different ways to give advice using English. So I want to move on to the conditionals now. So let's start by talking about the very first, the most common type of conditional. So we would say like, if I were you. If I were you. Obviously, I'm not you, but the way that we would give advice is, if I were you. This is using a second conditional. So you would say like, if I were you, I would, or if I were you, I'd, which is short for I would. So let me give you an example. If I were you, I would study harder. If I were you, I would get the apple instead of the orange. Another way for us to say, if I were you, you would say something like, if I were in your shoes. If I were in your shoes, I would blah, blah, blah. Now, this means exactly the same as if I were you. It means exactly the same as if I were in your shoes. If I was wearing your shoes. If I were wearing your shoes. So another conditional we can use, we could say like, if you want my advice, I think you should. Like, if you want my advice. Some people want your advice, some people don't want your advice. But it's just one of the ways of saying like, I'm about to give you advice. If you want my advice, I think you. So this is using the zero conditional. So you would say like, if you want my advice, which is the present, I think, which is also using the present. So we are using the zero conditional. So if your friend comes up to you and asks, if you were in my shoes, or if you were me, what would you do? So another way that you could give advice is you could say, if you really want to know, I would, and then follow with the advice. So for example, if you really want to know, I would have studied earlier. And another way to say that would be, if I were in your position. It's exactly the same as if you really want to know, I would. You would say, if I was in your position, or if I were in your position, I would have studied earlier. So now I want to move on to like the formal verbs, the formal ways of giving advice to people. So we would say something like, I suggest, I recommend, I urge, or I would advise. So suggest, recommend, urge, and advise. Now these can come across as very similar to modal. You would use the formal verb plus the base verb. So let's start with I suggest. You would say, I suggest that you study harder. So we have suggest, that you, and then the base verb, study harder. Okay, we would not say, I suggest that you studying harder. And that would be the same for recommend. I recommend that you study harder. Next, I want to move on to urge. Urge is urge means that it's very important. I'm urging you. Like you've probably heard the word urgent. So if I urge you, it means that it's urgent. It's very important. Now, lastly, with the formal verbs is I would advise you. Now, when I say I would advise you, let me give you an example. So you could have a dilemma, you could have a problem. You've made plans to go shopping with your friends, but you have a test on Monday and you're struggling in that subject. I would say I would advise you to cancel with your friends and study instead. Let's go back to I suggest or I recommend. When I was using it, I was using the word that. So I was saying I suggest that you, I recommend that you. Now you could actually take out the word that and you could use a gerund. So I would say I suggest you study harder. I recommend you eat less, for example. Now let's move on to the casuals. Now the casuals are the ways we give advice in everyday life, the way that most people speak to each other in a non-formal situation. So the way that you would talk to your friends or your family. This is the way that we would give advice most of the time when using English, when speaking English, of course. But at the same time, this is probably where you're going to struggle the most, as it's not formal English, it's informal English, if you say. So the way that it works is you're actually using the formal way of giving advice, well, not the formal way, the normal way of giving advice, but you're speaking more casually. So for example, you could say, you're gonna wanna. So that would be like you're going to want to. So let me give you an example. Let's say that you're hungry, but you left your bank card at home, your ATM card at home. You would say, oh, you're gonna wanna go home and get that, or you're gonna wanna find a way to pay for your food. You're gonna wanna. So moving on to the next way, you would say something like, you might wanna. So wanna is a short way of saying want to, or a more casual way of saying want to. You might want to, you might wanna. So this is, again, it's very common when we speak English, like with another native speaker or someone else that's fluent in English. You would use, oh, you might wanna, for example. So yeah. So yeah, this is like it's a polite way. You might want to consider studying harder next time, or you might want to consider looking for a new job, for example. It's a very polite way of saying you should probably look for a new job, which actually moves us on to the next one. You should probably consider. This is the same as you might wanna, but slightly less polite. You should probably consider looking for a new job, or you should probably consider updating your CV, for example. So this is very similar to saying you should maybe think about. Like you should probably consider, or you should maybe think about. These are very similar ways of giving advice. If you want to swap should for ought to, like we discussed previously in the modal verbs, you would actually put the maybe or the probably before the ought to. You should probably ought to. But at the same time, this is probably where you're going to struggle the most, as it's not formal English, it's informal English, if you say. So the way that it works is you're actually using the formal way of giving advice, well, not the formal way, the normal way of giving advice, but you're speaking more casually. So for example, you could say, you're gonna wanna. So that would be like, you're going to want to. So let me give you an example. Let's say that you're hungry, but you left your bank card at home, your ATM card at home. You would say, oh, you're gonna wanna go home and get that, or you're gonna wanna find a way to pay for your food. You're gonna wanna. So moving on to the next way, you would say something like, you might wanna. So wanna is a short way of saying want to, or a more casual way of saying want to. You might want to, you might wanna. So this is, again, it's very common when we speak English, like with another native speaker or someone else that's fluent in English. You would use, oh, you might wanna, for example. So yeah. So yeah, this is like it's a polite way. You might want to consider studying harder next time, or you might want to consider looking for a new job, for example. It's a very polite way of saying you should probably look for a new job, which actually moves us on to the next one. You should probably consider. This is the same as you might wanna, but slightly less polite. You should probably consider looking for a new job, or you should probably consider updating your CV, for example. So this is very similar to saying you should maybe think about. Like you should probably consider, or you should maybe think about. These are very similar ways of giving advice. If you want to swap should for ought to, like we discussed previously in the modal verbs, you would actually put the maybe or the probably before the ought to. So you would say, you probably ought to, or you maybe ought to think about doing this. So the maybe would be before ought to, but if you're going to use should, it would be after. The same with probably. It would be before ought to, but after should. So another way would be saying, by saying something like, have you thought about? This again is a casual way. It's kind of polite. It's asking if they've considered other options. So have you thought about maybe studying a little harder? Have you thought about maybe changing the books that you're using, for example? And the last way that I want to talk to you about giving advice is by using what you ought to do. This is actually more popular in American English than in British English. What you ought to do. So it's very similar to what we were talking about previously, using ought to, but it's shorter to oughta, what you ought to do. Let me give you an example. So what you ought to do is find a different way to study, maybe try studying online. What you ought to do is buy new books instead of using the old ones. So yeah, that's everything we have time for today. So I actually gave you 22 reasons, not 20. But I hope this helps, and maybe I'll see you next time. Thank you very much, guys. Bye-bye.
Can do everything on my own.
See ya!
Bye. I don't think we figured in his day at all.
Hey there, Aren. Is it true you didn't tell anyone where you were going? this marks 24 hours of being stuck. I've been chipping away. Want to keep warm than anything. I have about 150 milliliters of water left, which should keep me alive till tomorrow night, if I'm lucky. So that's it. Mom, Dad, I haven't appreciated you as I know that I could. I love you guys, and I'll always be with you.
Two, three.
They're adorable. Hi, puppy.
Marley, this is our house. And now it's yours.
Marley, you can't go through a screen door.
Marley! He's just like a little kid, except no furrier.
That's not a dog. That is evil with a dog face.
You get an answering machine, and then went back and had the phone for dessert.